Do you think this is down to a lack of trust from the government after the council's corruption allegations, therefore putting the vulnerable at an even higher risk? Today, I question the leader of the Liverpool City Council, Liam Robinson, on the city's current homelessness and housing crisis. Together with Kim Wallace, Liam welcomed me into his office in the Cunard building, located at Liverpool's Pier Head, to set the record straight.
Yeah, of course. I'm Liam Robinson. I'm the leader of Liverpool City Council, which effectively means I head the body of elected councillors and nominally am the lead politician for the City of Liverpool. What that basically means is that the council, so that body of 85 councillors that I lead, sets the policy of the council and effectively gives the instruction to the kind of officers that work for the council to deliver all those different things on our behalf. So I oversee that element and make sure that kind of the policies we decided upon, the decisions that we take, are then enacted by the full-time officers that work on our behalf. So that's a little bit about my role, but obviously Kath is much more of a specialist in this field.
Hi, so I'm Kath Wallace. I'm one of the officers that Liam's referred to, and I'm one of the heads of servicing commissioning. And one of my roles is to commission and fund all of the services around homelessness and specifically rough sleeping on behalf of Liverpool City Council, ensure that we've got as far as we can within our resources, the right services in place, responding to need, and then monitoring the quality of those services.
Brilliant, brilliant. So in May this year, that's when you become leader, wasn't it? In May this year, yeah. You said that you was confident that Labour can make Liverpool a zero homelessness city, yet the number of rough sleepers in the city has risen by nearly 50% this year, with fears this number could spiral further. Why is this? And do you still believe you can achieve a zero homelessness city status?
Okay, really good question, and obviously it's a very complicated issue because obviously that is very much our aim, that's our ambition, that is something we're very much focused on achieving. But if you look at the current situation, there's a variety of different kind of complex factors that have led to the problem that we've got here in Liverpool, but actually it's part of a wider national problem. A lot of this boils down to the fact that when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did their kind of mini budget that they had last year, because of some of the economic policies they chose to make, that led to inflation spiralling and interest rates in this country being risen quite significantly. That then led to a lot of private landlords increasing the rents that they charged, because a lot of those people own their properties on buy-to-let mortgages, and lots of people who were renting those properties could not afford the rent increases that they were being charged. Equally, you also found some people that had mortgages and owned their own properties equally couldn't keep pace with the mortgage increases that they were facing. So that added that pressure into the system. There's also a situation in this country where we have what are called Section 21 no-fault evictions, where a landlord can evict somebody without giving them a genuine reason. They can just make the choice that they want that person to move on and serve them as Section 21 no-fault eviction. Because of that, that means that kind of landlords are quite, at their own liberty, can move people on and evict people. Obviously, in our opinion, those Section 21 evictions need to be banned. So actually, people should only be being evicted when they've done something wrong and breached the terms of their tenancy, not for kind of no good reason. We also need to see the government uprate housing benefit properly, so people can afford to pay the rents that are being charged. The government's only uprating housing revenue allowances from April of next year, so kind of we've got the full winter period where that additional money will not kick in. There's also the aspect that in cities like Liverpool, but other parts of the country as well, because the government is going through the backlog of asylum seeker claims, with credit to them, they're starting to kind of do that much faster than they have done, but they're doing it through shortened timescales, that if people are given leave to remain, they're then sort of saying they have to leave the accommodation they were housing them in. That's adding to the pressure on the system. So it's all of those complicated things that are in there as well. I think from our perspective though, it is still very much our aim and our ambition to move to a zero homelessness situation. But there's a number of things that we need to do and will do to try to address that. A large part of that is around making sure we build more affordable homes within the city and across the country. Obviously, we're targeting building an additional 8,000 houses across the city in the next 4 years. I could say actually we've already got 1,000 properties being built by housing associations across the city at this moment in time, so that's a good start towards all of that. But equally as well, we want to make sure we've got all the right support in place to help people that do end up in a situation where they're without a home, because we know that for a lot of people, particularly when they end up rough sleeping, have got very complex situations, often with things like mental health issues. So it's about making sure that we actually are investing in all that wraparound support, because where we've been able to do projects with the City Region Combined Authority and Steve Rotherham, for example, on what's called Housing First, where it's not just about putting somebody into a home, it's about making sure that they've got all the kind of wraparound support they need to sustain that property and actually kind of build their life in a really kind of successful way. That's one of the key ways we can keep people with a roof over their head and having a fulfilling life that comes from that. So it's like a lot of these kind of big issues, they're not always straightforward, but we're absolutely focused on the different ways we can tackle it. We just need the government to work with us and work with similar cities like ourselves to address what is actually a national housing and homelessness crisis.
Yeah, brilliant. Because one of the things, I think you might be able to answer this, but you can put a roof over somebody's head, but it doesn't fix homelessness really. You know, it doesn't mean that they're going to adapt to that home, does it? There's obviously more than just putting a roof over somebody's head as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we do a lot of joint commissioning with public health. So even our outreach services, so this city is 24-hour outreach, a public health line that anybody can phone to get access to an outreach service. And that's actually jointly funded by public health. So we do have a really integrated offer. We offer in-reach around substance misuse, mental health. There is integrated wraparound support for people. All of our services are psychologically and trauma informed. We have access to psychologists, access to neuro triage around autism and issues like that. We're starting to see that become more prevalent. So we do really look at that whole person. Everyone out there has got a really individual story about why they're out there. Complex reasons and often a complex route out, but we do have a really strong, the city nationally is recognised even by government as having one of the best office around integrated working for this client group. And just a bit of context about that 50% comparison. So that was done as a snapshot from September 2022 to September 2023. As we got outreach out, I get daily figures about who's the numbers of people rough sleeping. Looking across a month, we see how many people we're seeing out over that month, and then we compare that to see whether numbers are going up or down. A number of those people will only be ever seen once, and obviously that's once too many. We don't want anybody to spend a single night on the street. Some of those people, at any time, about 20 to 30% do have accommodation they can return to. And that just highlights your point about it's not just about roof over someone's head, and so we spend a lot of time working with services to try and reconnect people back to their accommodation and why can't you stay there, why don't you feel safe, and that could be everything from they're fleeing a crime to the property's got damaged and they don't know how to get it fixed, so we do kind of invest in those types of resources as well. We're pleased to say since September we've started to see those figures come back down. I know that will not feel like it for the public walking around the streets, especially at this time of year. It's a really sensitive time for people, so I can appreciate that will not feel accurate for people. The numbers are starting to come down, and every month we get over 80% of the people who are seen indoors.
Brilliant.
So the figure that the 50%, whilst shocking and is a concern, there is a bit of a complex picture behind that I think people will be interested in knowing.
Yeah. What would you say the percentage was then? If not 50%, what do you think? You know, if it's dropping, if you don't think it's gone up by 50? Because that's what the echo...
It wasn't, it has. When we compared our figure from September 2022 to September 2023, we have seen 50% increase over the numbers of people who were seen over the course of that month. So no doubt, obviously, it has increased. I'm not suggesting it hasn't. My point was that it can be a bit misleading just to look at that headline figure, because if you think about that, 80% of those come indoors. And then, but unfortunately, you have a flow coming to the streets all the time. So what you don't do is start off with, say, 50 people at the beginning of the month and end up with 10, because sadly we have that flow, and that's one thing we need to get better at, is that getting more upstream and doing that prevention work that Liam referred to.
Liam, you've twice, wrote to government requesting urgent support with the unprecedented homelessness situation we are seeing here in Liverpool, who so far have failed to reply. Do you think this is down to a lack of trust from the government after the council's corruption allegations, therefore putting the vulnerable at an even higher risk?
In fairness, the government did respond once, and only did that back 10 days ago. But what we got was quite a mealy-mouthed response, mentioning about the kind of increase that they put in place for housing revenue allowance, but that only kicks in April, as I've mentioned before, so the whole of the winter period, where it's particularly most acute, there's no new money into the system. They've also mentioned about monies they are giving over a 3-year period, but we've got to remember, for all of those kind of housing crisis points I've said before, now is the time. We need kind of government support and intervention, not spread over a 3-year period. I think the other aspect as well is that our letters and our kind of contact to government was about an offer to work with them. It wasn't just about picking a fight, and that's why we requested government ministers to come to the city, see for themselves and work with us, because we're keen to actually kind of address the issue, not just turn this into some kind of political football. So we've only had to heighten this in the kind of public domain because of the fact we haven't had a proper response to the letter. In terms of your points about the things that have happened in the past, very much one of the things I'm focusing on is drawing a line under all of that and making sure that we kind of improve the council, not just so we can end the current government intervention that is going on in the council with the government appointed commissioners that we've got, but most importantly, actually make sure that we keep on improving Liverpool City Council so it ultimately can become an exemplar local authority. That's very much one of our key ambitions. I'm very pleased about the fact that the government commissioners have acknowledged the progress we've been making, particularly over the past 6 months, and will be handing some of the powers that they currently hold back to us early in the new year, particularly powers around finance, powers around appointment of officers, and some of the powers in the highways department that we've got. And we're continuing to work through all of those issues. So from our perspective, we're very much focusing on being the very best council we can be to deliver the best services we can to the 500,000 people that live within the city of Liverpool. That has to be one of the key priorities for us.
There's already been reports of 2 homeless deaths this winter, one in Manchester and one in Nottingham. A growing crisis and a government inaction could mean there are more to come. How do you make sure Liverpool isn't part of that statistic?
Okay, well, I think from our perspective, we very much focus on our severe weather protocols that we've got in place. Ours kick in at 2 degrees above freezing, which actually is higher than most other cities. But obviously 2 degrees above freezing, that's very, very cold. So that kind of process kicks in. We do have, as part of that, about 29 different kind of beds that are available that we can house people in that circumstance, and another, I think it's about another sort of 20 odds that we can stand up accordingly if we need those as well. So we know we've got capacity to get everybody indoors that needs to be indoors. We know from the detailed work that we do as well that, roughly speaking, about 30 people within the city each night that will be sleeping rough. Now, sometimes it's not always the same 30 people, it changes night to night, because a lot of those people that are sleeping rough actually do have accommodation they can go back to, but because a whole host of reasons, because of the complexity of their individual situations, sometimes they're sleeping rough on the streets, sometimes they're in other places. But we know we can put everybody into a physical property overnight to keep them safe and warm, and that's what we will keep on being determined to do. But that's why we need to maintain this focus, because as we go through the most difficult period of time for the year for weather, and also with all those other pressures we've been talking about, we have to keep a real focus upon this. I'm pleased that we are in a position we can get everybody inside, but we can't be complacent in the slightest.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of detail about how that works. So we monitor the long range weather forecast, so we know, at the weekend we need to trigger that. Our outreach team then will start planning, okay, who's out, who do we think we've got out, who's at risk of coming out, and what do we need to wrap around them, and then they will start matching individuals to those places. So by the time, people are considering bedded down, everybody knows where they're going and they've got a solution in place. If new people are then found during the night or contact the team during the night, there's additional capacity we can stand up. So some of the spaces are in now. So we've obviously got a range of commissioned temporary accommodation in the city. They're already warm and staffed and they're 24 hours a day. A lot of them have got rooms like this that are kind of used as communal lounges, and so we use those as sort of mini sort of sit provision. So they'll take in 2 or 3 people. So the staff there that will provide, obviously make sure they're warm, comfortable, provide access to medication. If people are going into any of our emergency bed and breakfast, the Whitechapel Centre then coordinate that, ensure they've got access to food, medication support, and are then most importantly followed up the next day with a plan about where they go to next.
That's brilliant that you follow it up as well, that's important. Last year, plans for a new accommodation centre for rough sleepers in Liverpool fell through, with £4 million worth of funding for the project returned back to the government, failing the most vulnerable people in Liverpool. Why did the council fail at this, and what has been learned since?
Okay. This is obviously something that kind of, whilst it predates my time as leader of the council, that doesn't mean we don't need to kind of understand what happened and how we learn the lessons from that. The situation actually predated all the way back to 2020. Yes, it was a £4 million grant that was available from government, but we as a city council needed to put another £6 million in that we were willing to do to actually kind of make sure the facility would work in exactly the way it would need to. As my understanding, as we worked through the project, the actual building, we'd identified a number of complexities arose that meant we weren't able to use that individual building. We did go back to the government and we did sort of ask for an extension to the time limits to say, because that building is no longer one that's available for us to use, can we look at our alternatives? And the government at that point refused. I'm not going to sit here and say that kind of there aren't lessons that needs to be learned, and it could and should have been done much better than it was. I think my focus though is I can't do anything about things that have happened in the past. I can make sure though we have a real kind of detailed focus on what we're doing now, and that is what we are looking at about what the next stages of putting in place those type of things could be within the city to sort of give us further relief in what is a very difficult situation.
So that was a grant that was originally put in place in response to the increases we saw during COVID and everyone in some of those pressures. So in responding to that, when it was evident that for a whole range of reasons that project was not going forward as we planned, there was a series of other measures, so we brought in a range of other accommodations since then. We've since opened up over 60 beds for rough sleepers through our first night from the streets offer. We delivered about 130 dispersed tenancies, again working with partners, working with our housing association partners who are really critical with this. All our partners are, we've got a really powerful range of partners that are really committed to working with the city in relation to homelessness and rough sleeping. We brought a more safe accommodation for victims and survivors of domestic abuse, which is a real issue for us in the city. And we've got further plans to bring on even more accommodation in relation to that. The city has also committed a significant amount of capital funding to redevelop our harm reduction service, which is a service that for men who have got long-term substance misuse issues and need a different type of approach that may be offered in temporary accommodation. So we are putting that investment back in a different way.
Brilliant, that's really good to hear that. Here in Liverpool, midwives are predicting a rise in sudden infant death syndrome because new mums who are homeless are swaddling their babies to stay warm, or are being put in hotels with no facilities to sterilise or to cook. Surely these mums and newborns should be a priority, So why aren't they given the basic facilities needed to look after their newborns?
Okay, well, it's obviously tragic that kind of midwives are making that prediction, and obviously kind of we need to kind of make sure that we're focusing upon that. So we are going through kind of all the details of everyone that's currently in some form of temporary accommodation to actually look at who we've got and who we need to kind of prioritise to moving to appropriate longer term accommodation as it becomes available, because at the end of the day temporary accommodation is not ideal for anyone for a long period of time. Crucially though, for any children, particularly kind of young children, newborns, it particularly isn't ideal. So that's why we're actually going through all the kind of details of everyone that we are currently housing in temporary accommodation and looking at how we can prioritise those with young children to move them somewhere kind of more appropriate, to make sure we're giving those kids and young people the best possible start in life that can allow them to flourish, you know, going to school and every other aspect of how they can have, you know, a well-being that will set them for the course of their lives.
In the interim, we're doing a piece of work with our public health colleagues around health visitors to make sure that, so we're analysing everybody who's got a child under 1 who are particularly vulnerable, and ensuring that they're linked in with the health visiting service, or somebody is keeping a check on those. We do, wherever we possibly can, prioritise, even when they're in temporary accommodation, families, and particularly young families, for the self-contained apartments that we use. Unfortunately, just through the sheer pressures on the service, that's not always available, but where people are placed in those facilities, it's the absolute shortest time possible. There is a specific team that focuses particularly on families and temporary accommodation, and so we'll do that exercise and make sure everybody's linked in with a health visitor.
What are the numbers? That's quite interesting. What's the numbers in Liverpool of mums with, you know, children under 1 that you...
There's about 40 currently.
Really, yeah. So that's still quite high, isn't it?
It is really high. It is, yeah.
But surely there's none on rough sleeping, surely?
No. We've never... I've worked in homelessness in this city for years, and we've never had... Legally, they're a priority, never mind morally for the city, but legally they're a priority. So the legislation, how the legislation applies for families is a little bit different than it is maybe for single people. They are a priority need legally, so we legally have a duty to provide them temporary accommodation. So you really don't see children on the streets. It would be an immediate safeguarding issue. Yeah, it would be an immediate safeguarding issue.
From a social service perspective, if a parent was choosing to sleep rough with a newborn, we would have to step in. Yeah. So we wouldn't let that.
Yeah, I've heard of that, yeah, but as I say, it's interesting that so there's 40 with
there's 40 The vast majority of them are in like the sort of service departments, the self-contained service departments, so obviously facilities are there. Are good.
I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but at the minute, landlord evictions are now the main cause of homelessness in the city. Do you think the council could have a more proactive approach at ensuring that everyone has access to clear information and support around housing options?
Yeah. I think we're being as proactive as we can, but obviously we need government to work with us on a wider kind of package here. Obviously we've got things like a landlord forum in place across the city, and work very closely with the good private landlords, of which most private landlords are good private landlords. And that's about how kind of we understand the pressures there, but they also understand the issues that tenants and residents are facing, and making sure that there's the right information that they're obliged to give to their tenants. Also in certain parts of the city we've got compulsory landlord licensing, particularly in those parts of the city where we've got a high number of private rented properties, mainly those kind of communities that surround the city centre with traditional terraced properties. And that gives us kind of much stronger legal powers to get those landlords to adhere to not just kind of actually kind of signing up to the licensing scheme, but then adhering to the quality of standards of the property, and making sure that they're supporting their residents and dealing with their residents appropriately. Yeah. So we've got that in place. That's not straightforward, because we have to ask government for permission to do that. We can't just automatically do that, because if it was devolved to us, we would put in place a compulsory landlord licensing scheme across the whole of the city. We would choose to do that if we had that power. I think the other aspect, though, obviously, is like we were talking about before, we actually need the government to ban Section 21 no-fault evictions, because that would ensure that it wasn't pressing people out of you know, the current housing circumstances that are leading to people being evicted and having to move out of their current properties.
Evicted unfairly.
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. So from our perspective, there's a lot we're proactively trying to do, but we also need a national government that will take this situation seriously alongside us.
Yeah. With cost of living crisis and a national housing emergency, is affordable housing now a priority for you?
Very much so, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because affordable housing is key. And it's not just because this is a kind of a particular pressure at this moment in time. We actually know that kind of someone's house, their home, is the cornerstone of their life at the end of the day. And so many kind of other things revolve around you having a good quality, affordable, secure home at the end of the day, particularly for children going to school and their ability to kind of do well in education and their well-being kind of into life through their employability, the ability to hold down a job and make sure you can flourish in your own career, making sure that the property's of good quality so it doesn't affect your own health, you know, both physical health and respiratory issues all the way through to kind of mental health and the stress of being able to afford the rent. Actually having a good quality, affordable, secure home is key to your success in life. So from our perspective, it's absolutely key. That's why it was front and centre within our own manifesto pledges to build at least another 8,000 properties across the city. We want to go much further than that, and particularly if there's a change of government. We have a Labour government that's committed to building 1.5 million properties across the country. We believe there's a huge opportunity to build a lot on particularly brownfield sites here in Liverpool that can address some of our local issues, but can be part of a solution to that overall national housing crisis that we've got. So it's absolutely vital to us.
I've kept you long enough here, but one last question. What is your long-term vision for Liverpool homelessness?
Okay, well, the vision very much is aspiring to become a zero homelessness city. So making sure that we continue to have all the right kind of support functions in place to make sure that nobody should be sleeping rough and out on the street. But equally as well, focusing on that kind of issue of making sure that everybody's got a good quality, affordable home, and that we don't have people that kind of are being evicted and turned into kind of temporary accommodation. You know, so that very much is still the focus, that's the ambition, that's what we'll keep on striving towards, even though it's very difficult at this moment in time because of the national crisis that's particularly acute in cities like Liverpool, but not just Liverpool. Edinburgh's declared a housing emergency. I know Nottingham is facing kind of similar pressures from talking to their leader, as is Cardiff, and Manchester equally have been pointing out the problems and challenges that they face. So there's genuinely the national issue that is acute in big cities, and one that we want to address, and we need a government that will work with us to address them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that.
Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you.